Hey folks, welcome to the Dark Horse Podcast Private Q&A Sunday session, Memorial Day weekend, end of May 2021. Was any of that wrong?
Now with non-private Q&A cadence.
Now with non-private Q&A cadence. Sure, I was just trying it out. Just,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Hi,
Could be a
everyone.
thing.
Good to be here. Yeah, it is beautiful here. I was checking out the chat while we were getting ready, and I don't see anyone who's admitting that they're in the Pacific Northwest yet, but it is gorgeous here finally again.
The squirrels are out climbing the houses.
Yeah, I came in the room before I ran to the grocery store to pick Toby up some milk, and there was a squirrel on the screen, hanging on the screen outside the window here. On the second floor. Yeah.
Seeing what it's about.
Yep. And then I saw him climbing down the clematis when I went out to the car. Anyway, Vancouver, Canada. Yeah, there it is. And Shop Citizen, I think, is at least pretending to be in the Pacific Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Seattle. There it is. Cool. So many questions this week, this month. So we'll just jump into it. We're going to do some sort of Evo and human Evo questions first. We got a couple of just like quick questions we can get through, some miscellaneous, social, and then finish off on a whole bunch of COVID questions. And we're going to miss a lot of them, but here we go.
All right.
You ready?
I've
only vetted
so
one
ready.
with Bret so far, so he's literally only seen or heard one of these questions so far. And it's not the first one.
All right.
You prepared?
It's candid, off the cuff.
Yeah. I've never done that before.
Never.
No.
Never.
Suppose primates had never existed or had gone extinct early in their development. Could you speculate on which species would eventually have taken our place at the top of the intelligence stack? Cephalopods? ? Marine mammals?
I'd say not cephalopods, because cephalopods being
Octopus and
squid, octopus,
Nautiluses.
cuttlefishes, nautili.
Cuttlefee.
No. So first of all, I should say a discussion I've had with Eric many times. Cephalopods are special, but really the specialness in cephalopods is the octopuses. But
yeah, seems to be.
They're not social. And so I would say the problem with octopuses as potential evolutionary precursors to a civilized critter is that they have a big leap to cover with sociality. Sociality being required effectively for cumulative emergent technology, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with toothed whales as a potential human analog is their appendages having been turned into flippers. They are hobbled with respect to actually doing things like testing hypotheses. So in some sense, we had an advantage that came from our opposable thumbs, and our opposable thumbs are not initially evolved for manipulation of anything. They're evolved to grip round branches in trees.
Yeah, that's true. So you said, I'm sorry, I'm like the reg is all messed up here, so I'm stuck in place. You said what tooth in Western Australia, which is one of the most famous places where dolphin behavior is studied. They will put sponges on their noses in order to hunt sea urchins.
It's kind of the equivalent of lampshades on the head after you're.
Except I think they're not drunk. I mean, it's hard to tell. Maybe we haven't heard that they are, and maybe the researchers are protecting them. Maybe they're getting drunk with the dolphins. I don't know. But, but no, presumably to protect their sensitive little noses from the urchin stings.
Well, okay, so I'm not arguing that they can't hypothesis test. I'm arguing that they are hobbled in the degree to which they can.
No, for sure. And so there are a few clades that are less hobbled, still hobbled compared to us.
Well, actually, now that you mention it,
I just figured this is where you were going.
Squirrels aren't the obvious go-to.
Yeah.
But squirrels are highly intelligent, have limbs that have, I would say, high potential to evolve into carefully fine-tuned manipulating devices. They're not super highly social, but they're social enough. So anyway.
We've got screen timed out, buffering here, reloading helped. Okay. hopefully reload and see if
if you guys are having more trouble, let us know.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I would say is you've got a lot of things that have sort of in the ballpark collections of stuff, and given that the question doesn't have a time limit.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, as you've pointed out, what I refer to as the usual suspects.
Yeah.
All the sort of the long-lived organisms that are social, that have generational overlap, that have learning, that have long childhoods, include not cephalopods, right? Not octopus, which tend to be solitary, very smart but solitary. But yes, dolphins, elephants, wolves, other primates, but we're excluded from thinking about other primates here. And then over in bird space, we've got parrots and we've got corvids as the main leaders here. Corvids being the crows and the ravens and the jays and magpies.
Well, what I would say is there's probably Jared Diamond does this list of characteristics necessary for creatures to be domesticable. And it's a very interesting list because when you get down to it, the only things that tick all the boxes, there's a handful.
Meerkats.
Yeah. So meerkats I would put up with squirrels or maybe higher because they have the potential to evolve the ability to manipulate objects.
And
Elephants
meerkats like
really
ground
don't.
squirrels. Well, but they do with their trunks.
Yeah, but my point is really how good is that appendage? How good a precursor is it to an appendage that can actually lead you to building structures, test apparatus, all of that? And so I would say wolves are hobbled, lions are hobbled, elephants are hobbled, dolphins are hobbled. Crows are not necessarily hobbled.
Yeah, anything that has gone bipedal, I'm walking away from this, has gone bipedal or has an ability to do it facultatively, like meerkats and ground squirrels and regular squirrels, and then the birds. Has an ability to then use not just something on their face, but also these appendages to potentially manipulate and carry, manipulate and do things.
Yep. Something like that.
Cool. Long telomered mice, perhaps?
No, they'll be too busy dying of cancer.
It takes a lot of effort.
It takes all your effort ultimately.
Yeah. Maddie's like, you forgot about me. No. I think that you are underselling my ability to move tools around. See? All right. Considering that a scientist was able to remove the glands that caused a female octopus to stop eating after laying eggs, causing her to live way longer, wouldn't octopuses be able to support their young better by staying alive considering their intelligence, or just reproduce again?
Well, the answer is obviously no, but then the question is, why is the answer no?
Before you launch into it, just a moment about semel-parity and iteroparity.
Yep.
Right? So semel 1, I actually have not seen that root otherwise. Parity, birth, basically. Breeding once and then dying is the semel-parous condition, which many or all octopuses have. I'm not sure. All. Okay. And then iteroparity, which is far more common and which is what we do. Is iterated multiple reproductive events in a lifetime, expected anyway at the species level. And so the other, the thing that many people in North America will be thinking of now that's semel-parous otherwise is the periodical cicadas. Right?
Yeah, and salmon and
sure.
Or at least
the semel-parous salmon.
Well, the West Coast salmon. The East Coast salmon are not. And actually, there's an exception in the West Coast salmon. The steelhead trout is actually a salmon, and it is iteroparous. But
yeah, so salmon is a weird word. Salmon sort of is this ecological thing about the color of the flesh.
Yeah.
And salmo, which is the genus of the East Coast salmon, is actually much more distantly related to Oncorhynchus, which is the Pacific Coast salmon genus, than Oncorhynchus. Well, Oncorhynchus includes, as you say, trout species. Yep. So, trout and Pacific salmon.
Oncorhynchus does not include trout, I think.
It includes the steelhead, you just said.
Oh, it includes a misnamed trout. It does not include the trout proper, but they are salmonids.
Yep.
So there's a slightly larger group that includes the trout and Oncorhynchus inclusive of the steelhead. But anyway, and there's a really amazing story that we don't know very well and won't tell here, but there's a really amazing story about the long-term glaciation of the northern hemisphere and the way that interacts with the tendency of these salmon to go back to the sea and then not go back to the sea under certain conditions when their access to the sea is cut off. And so these things fluctuate. If we could observe these things on very long time scales, it would be an amazingly interesting.
We had to take all
dynamic.
the salmon stuff out of our book.
Yeah.
Disappointed.
Yeah.
Salmon are great.
They are great. They're really awesome. All right. So back to the
salmon
question.
parody, octopus. Why? Given that there is a simple switch, why aren't they just doing it?
So the reason I say that the answer is obviously no is that you have pointed out the evidence that there's a trivial alteration that would make it work, right? Now, even if we didn't have that evidence, you could be pretty damn sure, selection being as clever as it is, that if it were better for salmon mothers to survive, defend their kids, and reproduce a second time, that they would evolve to do it, right? So semelparity is an adaptation, is another way of saying that. Mm-hmm. But the key thing in all instances of semelparity, and it has evolved in many taxa, including lots of plants, even one tree that I know of. But the thing that unites all of those critters is, I have to say this may even be my contribution to things. I certainly wrote about it in my dissertation work, that the likelihood of accomplishing a second reproduction is sufficiently low that anything held in reserve from the first reproductive attempt would almost certainly be wasted. In other words, there's a cost-benefit question. For every unit of nutrition that a salmon carries in her body, for example, there's a question about whether to spend it now or whether to save it for a future reproductive event. As the likelihood of a future reproductive event being even possible goes down below some threshold, then it makes sense not to save anything, to spend absolutely everything on the current reproductive event. Even a single extra egg produced now is better spent than that same amount of resource preserved for the possibility of a future. And if you think about in Western salmon why this would be true, it's kind of obvious with one unobvious point, right? It's a very tough road to hoe, right? If a salmon reproduced up in the Columbia somewhere, and then she went back out to sea, and then she spent another 4 years out at sea dodging sharks and tuna and other predatory critters, and then had to climb back up the Columbia again, right? And in the original condition where all of this evolved, had to face, treacherous waterfalls that are only climbable when the water level is just so, where there are bears, grizzly bears at the shore, catching salmon as they try to leap up these waterfalls. It's so freaking perilous that the basic point is, look, you're not going to make it a second time. Might as well leave it all on the field is basically the analysis.
Yeah. And, if anyone, maybe Chop Citizen, or I can't remember who was in Vancouver, but anyone who's in the Pacific Northwest, if you've seen this fall migration, it's extraordinary, and you can see it in calm places. But if you go and watch the salmon as they're climbing, as they're jumping up waterfalls, low waterfalls, but it's truly extraordinary.
It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, for sure.
And
go ahead.
No, go for it.
Well, I just wanted to finish off with the octopus.
Right, that's right. So we got over on salmon space, but the octopus goes all in, even more. All in is all in.
Yeah.
But another reason the octopus thing isn't going to work is her eggs are actually going to be, once they hatch, are going to be consuming her body.
Right.
So her body becomes their first series of meals, and if she is literally pulling resources away from them in order to do what? To make more of them that also won't survive. So it doesn't hold together as sort of a natural history narrative.
Yeah, this is what I was going to say next, is the fact, if the way to think about it is the octopus, the female octopus, is accumulating a store of resources. And if you think of it as an analog to the nutritive part of a bird egg, right? Mm-hmm. That is the fuel that is going to get these babies through a first series of developmental stages. And the point is, she can accumulate a certain amount during a lifetime, and then there's a question of how to spend it. And the answer is selection is telling us that it is much better spent feeding those babies and transferring it to those. And, you could tell a very interesting story as the number of surviving babies drops, which it will do precipitously. The remaining ones have that much larger a fraction of the nutrition stored in her body And so somehow that very strange story nets out to a simple one with respect to cost-benefit analysis.
Yep. Good. With so many species of birds, how did bats come to occupy the airspace niche? Or is it the nighttime airspace niche?
I think this is exactly it. Birds are actually, if you want to measure just simple flight characteristics, birds are superior to bats. For one thing, they've been at it longer, quite a bit longer. So the selective refinement of their capacity is greater. But bats...
they're using their whole forearm. Not just
using
their hand.
Well, the bats are using their whole
I
forearm.
know.
It's just that this part is reduced to the close to the body part.
Yeah.
But so anyway, birds are, if you just compare flight characteristics, birds are superior. But night is a challenge, right? Night, in absolute terms, night is not just a different thing to specialize on. It's a harder thing to specialize on because it's dark. And if you're a visually orienting creature, it's very hard to deal with just the absolute reduction in photons and the fluctuation in the available photons between, let's say, a moonless night and a moon-filled night.
So there's really just a couple of clades of birds that have evolved to deal with nighttime well.
Yeah, there are quite a few, and they all have different tricks.
Quite a few clades, you think?
Well, you've got...
I suspect there's twice as many as I'm thinking of, but I can only come up with 2 at the moment. I've got owls,
nightjars,
and I guess 3. Well, no. So owls, nightjars, which I think are like cryptomulgids or something. I'm probably mispronouncing that. And I think actually patus may be in that clade.
I think patus are
incredible.
Favorite bird, man. I mean, maybe hummingbirds come out ahead for sheer coolth, but
yeah. But so who else? And owls is a big, diverse group, but it's one.
I don't want to say a lot of dumb stuff about bird clades that I'm going to turn out to be wrong about. So I'm going to say I'm not
claiming to be avian systematists here. So
we should figure it out. I'm wondering about things like oil birds.
Oil birds aren't nocturnal.
They're not. Okay. No. Well, okay. So you've got some things that it's a little hard to say, like frigate birds, right? Which stay aloft.
They're like neither, right?
Right.
They managed to evade the photoperiod limitations somehow by just continuing on.
Not paying attention. On autopilot, almost literally.
Yeah.
But okay, so anyway, bats. So what you should know is that there are 2 clades of bats that are together united in a single clade. So bats, there was debate about this for a decade or so, but it turns out bats are one clade. They do have a shared common ancestor, but there are 2 large clades within it. There are microbats, which are the ones, if you're in North America, that you are exclusively familiar with. Actually, that would be true anywhere in the temperate zone. And then there are megabats, which are flying foxes and their close relatives. These are the pteropodids. And the microbats echolocate, which is how they do what the birds can't mostly figure out how to do. Now, there are a couple of species or a couple of small clades of echolocating birds, but in general, birds don't have this trick down. And the echolocating birds actually, if my memory serves, are limited to echolocating in... No, that's not going to be right. Some of them are.
There's
the
caves,
swifts
and then there's swifts.
There's swifts that echolocate in caves, and I'm
if
not
it's
going to
oil
get myself
birds,
in trouble.
maybe, yeah.
But anyway, the point is, the microbats have nailed echolocation, and it means that the microbats have the ability to do at night what birds do better in the day with vision, and so they take over the night shift. This does not explain pteropodids, which, except for a couple of exceptions,
the flying foxes,
the flying foxes, which are called flying foxes. If you think about the iconic giant dog-looking bat with the big eyes, right? That's a pteropodid. They are exclusively plant-feeding bats of the old world. They don't exist in the new world, and they don't exist in the temperate zones. And they only eat plants, either fruit or flower products. But anyway, they don't echolocate, with a couple of weird exceptions. There's a genus called Rosettus, in which there are some echolocating megabats that echolocate in a totally different way, separately evolved. They do it by slapping their tongue on the floor of their mouth, I think, instead of... It's not a true vocalization, and they only do it in their caves.
Evolution is grand.
Evolution is so cool. We can talk about why they only do it in the caves at some other point, but the basic idea is Giant eyes are basically like, I don't have one here, but when you see a camera with a very big lens, like a wide lens, the reason for that is it collects a ton of light, right? So it actually allows you to do more with the camera. Eyes are the same way. Tiny eyes are limited in the amount of light they collect. Big eyes collect more. That's why nocturnal animals that use sight have big eyes. And the pteropodids do this, and they do it pretty well, but it's not as good as echolocation. Anyway, the basic point is night is an obstacle. If you can figure out a solution to it, then it's also potentially an advantage. You can hide from your predators. And the punchline of this whole story is the biggest hazard to bats is predatory birds. And because it's predatory birds, night is the place for them to hang out since they're not as adept.
Yeah.
Right. So using night as crypsis is what's really driving this.
Yeah. Let me just pick up on two things I see in the chat. Australia is considered old world. The only thing that's new world is the Americas, North America and South America. Obviously, Australia is newer. And it's just a social description of old world is where humans started, and new world is where we got to later. And yeah, we got to Australia later than we got to Europe and Asia. And obviously, we started out in Africa, but we got to the Americas latest of all.
What did you just say? Did you just tell me that Australia is formally considered part of the New World?
Did I misspeak? I meant the old world.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, but
yeah, I think I misspoke.
Thank God, because I was going to have to go.
I thought I said that the Americas is the only part of the New World. Did I not say that?
No, I don't think you said. We'll have to go back and check the tape, but
well, or they can
tell us.
Yeah. So yeah, it's newer than these other places that we've been to, but it's still considered the old world. And so yes, they do have flying foxes, but flying foxes, pteropodids have not crossed the Pacific or the Atlantic, basically. Yep. And then there's another Chop Citizen apparently doesn't like Steller's jays. So what do we think about that? Do we cancel him?
Who doesn't like Steller's jays?
I know, right?
How does anybody not like Steller's jays?
Well, they are raucous. My mother also doesn't like them. She was alarmed. So we, Bret brought enough peanuts home that Toby, our 15-year-old, asked if we'd gotten an elephant. And what we've begun doing is putting them out. And unfortunately, I do think that the songbirds are less abundant now. We still have a lot, but we got Steller's jays, we got crows, we got squirrels now, all vying for peanuts that we put out for them. And
yeah, which is embarrassing, but nonetheless, it's
what's embarrassing about it?
I would far.
Who's
prefer,
embarrassed?
I am.
Okay.
I would far prefer that we had moved somewhere where we could passively observe everything and did not have to induce anybody to come visit us. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, Portland is disturbed enough, especially by invasive English ivy, that I don't feel so terrible disturbing it in response. The coyotes are also, while they are natively here, are obviously much more dominant than they would otherwise be, based on their interaction with humans.
And we got rid of the wolves and the mountain lions.
Yeah, we got rid of the competitors that would have
Feeks.
Yeah, the feeks, exactly.
Yeah, they think I said it right.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. This is the simplest of all explanations here, is that I somehow the buffer got mixed up and I heard you exactly upside down. But
okay, so we're gonna start. We're not going to do this thing where it's like 20-minute answers for the first 4 answers, and then we get through not as many as I wanted to, because there might be ones later that I also wanted us to spend time on. It's not like these are the ones that I thought we need to spend a ton of time on. I'd also like to know so this is Tesla who's sitting on my lap, and he seems to want to scratch his face on the mic, and I'm wondering if you can hear that when it happens. I doubt it, but he probably won't do it again now that I've asked. Next question. I have been watching hummingbirds at the feeder a lot the past few weeks. They're majorly aggressive and territorial over the food source. Do you think hummingbirds would ever be so territorial over particularly good flour? Is bird feeder culture a positive compensation for ecosystem destruction, all things considered?
Great question.
Yeah.
Hummingbirds are absolutely equally territorial in nature. There are Lex and fascinating competition.
And zippy fights where we've watched hummingbirds both at feeders in the tropics and here, but and at flowers, and never seen anyone obviously injured or impaled, but man, do they have weaponry on them.
Yeah. It's a lot of jousting. Or swashbuckle. It's not jousting. They don't joust. They swashbuckle.
Yeah. They joust not.
They joust not.
Yeah.
It's good. Just not. All right. Yeah. So I hate hummingbird feeders. I hate them. We have one
You were
now.
going to say you hate hummingbirds.
No, I
Like,
love
who are
hummingbirds.
you?
I hate hummingbird feeders. I hate them, but that you're right that you're dealing with a thoroughly disturbed environment. I think the best way to deal with it is hummingbird flowers, planting them in such a way that you have consistency. But you have to realize that what you're really up against with hummingbirds is their behavior called trap lining, which basically means that they fly a circuit of productive flowers in general and hummingbird feeders if they exist instead. And so in order to get a garden to work properly, you have to be really thoughtful about having something blooming almost all the time that they can consume, and it's not so easy to do. So I would say the one caution is if you're going to have a hummingbird feeder, you got to maintain it, right? What you don't want to do is get a bird dependent on your hummingbird feeder and then have it go dry while you're on vacation, right? This is just not a cool trick to play on these animals. So anyway, it's an understandable thing to do in order to see hummingbirds, but be thoughtful about the fact that those hummingbirds may be more dependent on your feeder than you realize.
Yeah. So interesting point here. XN says Wikipedia says humans first in Australia 50 to 60,000 years ago, later in Europe 40 to 45. And then it gets more complicated if you think about Neanderthals. So like hominins, I think there's evidence for first in Europe, earlier in Europe than in Australia, which would be the Neanderthals. But of course we have Flores Island. The hobbits of Flores Island, which is just north of Australia and Indonesia. And I can't remember when the hobbits of Flores would be the thing to Google here, are thought to have been there. But yeah, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there is thought to have been a move up from my perspective, from your guys' perspective, sort of up out of Africa and immediately east and over, like basically along coastlines, and ultimately into Australia pretty early, although it's such an easier move. It's only one crossing to get into Europe that it seems extraordinarily likely that Europe would have been early. On the other hand, you got a latitudinal problem when you're going north, as opposed to sticking to what you already know, sort of Jared Diamond style, if you're going east into Asia.
You have a big problem in terms of the ability to just tolerate winter.
Yeah.
I think there are two different things.
But the simple thing that I said, I think, is not right. Obviously Australians, Australia was one of the later old world continents to get populated. It's not that simple. Yeah.
Right. And so I do think the modern human migration to Australia is very, very ancient. I believe that is correct. Mm-hmm. The Flores Island population, we don't know who these critters were, right? And so there's even the possibility that they were Homo erectus, right? A diminutive Homo erectus. So anyway, that's not likely to be even related to the Aboriginal founding,
right? But hominins, for sure.
And the real problem is Wallace's line, right? Mm-hmm. So when was the first crossing of Wallace's line? Flores Island is one side of it, and
which side is it?
It's on the
I can't
western
tell
side.
What orientation you're doing there.
It's on the western side.
Okay. So Wallace's line is this longitudinal line that basically splits Indonesia, modern day Indonesia, in 2/3 of it. Indonesia's to the west, and then Papua New Guinea and just a couple islands, and Australia to the right, and it bears the historical imprint of very ancient continental drift, such that the flora and fauna on either side of Wallace's line are very, very distinct.
Oh, it's also
and it's named for Wallace, the co-discoverer of evolution by natural selection.
Yeah, it's also very, very oceanically deep. Right. Whereas everything else there is shallow.
Well, that's some of the evidence for the continental plates.
But it also means that during ice ages, when a lot of land emerges from the sea, it's still a waterway.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Can sibling rivalry be explained by adaptive evolution? I've always assumed it had something to do with competition for finite resources and parental attention, but I've noticed that my own kids engage in rivalry-like behavior with one another, even when resources are abundant and when mom and dad aren't present.
Well, I would say, I think the null hypothesis is that sibling rivalry just results from having siblings that are very, very much a pain in the ass.
Is that right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
No.
And you think it's always the older sibling that is the pain in the ass?
Almost always, yes.
You think that was the case in my family?
Yeah. Your family's tougher, but
yeah.
Now, in seriousness, sibling rivalry clearly emerges from adaptive evolution, and it emerges from the fact of siblings being only 50% genetically related by descent. And that means that their interests, while much more aligned than one's interests are with a rando person from your population, are not perfectly aligned, just as fetus and mother's interests are not perfectly aligned, accounting for all of the metabolic syndromes involved in pregnancy. So it is, and this is actually very well explored before David Haig had done his work on
genomic imprinting,
and basically illnesses of fetal mother conflict.
Yeah, maternal fetal conflict.
Before that, Bob Trivers was really the precursor work. Bob Trivers, our undergraduate advisor and friend, really explored the territory of divergent interests within closely related individuals and its impact on behavior. So yes, it is thoroughly adaptive and very much about the degree of shared genes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's sibling rivalry is absolutely something that goes on in other organisms as well. In fact, boy, since we moved, I still don't quite always know where all of the books that I used to know exactly where they are, but somewhere around here, we have a book on the evolution of sibling rivalry, and it's mostly about birds and mammals. There's just, God, I'm covered in cat fur because it's hot here. He's shedding. Even though many other species lay lots of eggs at a time, much like in species that don't have any parental care, in the same species, even if you're emerging from the same brood, you sort of hatch and leave. You don't really have any relationship with your siblings. So, but there is not just, for instance, maternal fetal conflict, as David Haig began working on in the 90s, I think, but in utero conflict between siblings. And so, this will partially explain things like the runt of the litter is actually not necessarily entirely maternal resources not going to mother not giving equally to the young, but actually siblings either ganging up on or one sibling ganging up on a other one so that they can acquire more and more of the resources.
In fact, there's evidence that interuterine conflict is actually the evolutionary origin of the cage match.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. That would explain some of the discomforts of pregnancy, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also BattleBots.
Regarding infants waking up at night and disturbing their parents' sleep rhythm, is this... Excuse me, I've got fur in my throat now. Is this a product of modern society? If I imagine primitive tribes of humans sleeping together, there would always be several infants disturbing the sleep of the whole tribe. Did infants behave differently then? Did they sleep separately from the group, or what is going on there? So there's a whole lot here, and I was actually just, the final proofs on our book. I was just rereading a section that goes into this a little bit. Actually, the sleep chapter. Infants waking up, so in what you're calling so-called primitive tribes, no, they of course didn't sleep separately from the group. That's an entirely modern and really just a weird phenomenon in both senses of the word.
No, that was an idle threat that Pleistocene parents used to level at their children.
Have you sleep with the lions?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But now that us in the Western educated, industrialized, rich democratic societies are failing at a number of things that the unweird people don't. So yeah, sticking your kid in its own room and then letting it cry it out when it wakes up totally alone and is looking for comfort. Well, that's not going to produce a very well well-comforted child, or a child who knows how to comfort themselves, frankly, despite what some of the crazy parenting advice suggests. And furthermore, infants who wake up in the night, if they're actually sleeping next to their mother, don't disturb anyone. If the co-sleeping thing gets a bad rap in many modern circles because it's imagined that, oh my God, having an infant is so exhausting and your sleep is already so disrupted, and why would you want it more disrupted by having a kid wake up all the time? And in fact, it's, we never tried it another way, but anecdotally, and I know also from the literature, having when your baby is tiny and still breastfeeding a lot, having your kid wake up and be able to start nursing whenever they want actually is not very waking of either you or the child at all. And it allows for, not as deep a sleep as you will get if you have, absolutely nothing disturbing you at all. On the other hand, that absolutely nothing disturbing you at all thing is probably about modernity as well.
I would say the way to think about it is there is a degree of dependence that changes over development. And mother and baby are effectively not two different creatures when the mother is pregnant. And after the baby is born, the degree of separation between the two individuals is not much. And so there's a way in which lying with your baby for a woman, the communication is subtle, not conscious. And so, the baby has needs during the night. The mother is literally evolutionarily built to provide for the child without it disrupting her health and well-being. And so what you really want to know is what is the environment in which that relationship unfolds. And this also, I would point out, has very interesting implications for I now regard it as insane behavior of putting diapers on children, which you're probably stuck doing because there's not a good alternative.
Yeah, we did.
Right. You have to. But the point is,
trying to figure out something else, but
in ancestral circumstances, the baby has control over its bowels, and it sends signals that it's now time that I have to take a crap, and the mother aims the baby in such a direction that is not a problem, and the whole thing is very seamless. And so what we do actually causes a child that is programmed to be able to coordinate with the mother so that process is not a problem, and we effectively blind them to it, so they lose control over it, and then we have to force them to gain control over it again.
Didn't I know how to do this?
Right. So it's crazy that we do this, and very destructive. But there's no real alternative because, you're going to walk around an urban environment with a baby who suddenly needs to poop, and you're in the elevator, and what do you do? And, it's a nightmare. So anyway, we have created the problem, and then we scratch our heads as if selection forgot that this was going to be an issue and basically was like, you figure it out. Well, that's not how it worked.
Yeah. A few questions in the same in a similar vein here. What causes some women to experience postpartum depression? Is it a modern problem, or is there historical evidence of something similar? And I don't know actually if we've really talked about this, nor do I have as clear a sense of what is going on with that as I do of a lot of these modern conditions. But in answer to the second part of the problem, I would be shocked, sort of evolutionarily shocked, if this was not a mostly weird phenomenon.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's going to be a modification of some potentially very terrible stuff, right? Being a mammal is awesome, except when it's terrible. And one of the ways...
offend the birds.
Or embolden them. I don't know. But the situation of conceiving a child that is going to be ungodly expensive to raise to adulthood based on the evidence that actually now is a pretty good moment, I've got enough resources, things are looking good, right?
Yep.
That decision can very easily be wrong based on bad luck between the time the baby was conceived and the time it was born. And so there is a lot of stuff in, primitive societies, which are all resource stressed necessarily for reasons we describe carefully in the book. Mm-hmm. But the fact of having the baby and situation having changed results in an awful lot of stuff like infanticide and things
Exactly.
in primitive societies. And so the question is, okay, what does that look like in the natural conditions where we perfectly well understand the logic? And how has the system that produces that kind of behavior been disrupted by our modern weird lifestyles in which people get wrong signals all the time. And so they have a very hard time figuring out where they are and what their prospects look like.
No, and I mean, it's also true that, as always, we're shunted into these binary spaces. And, I never veered into postpartum depression in any way. Like I really didn't like pregnancy, as you know, but as soon as both of our boys were born, it was wonderful. But I know it's not made up, and I know some people suffer terribly from it. And the love between mother and child is ineffable and gorgeous. And really anyone who is trying to get mothers to talk publicly about how maybe they didn't want to have kids, which is now something that's happening on the sort of illiberal left, that's monstrous.
Yep.
That's truly monstrous for both mothers and children. But I think it may emerge from a similar sort of like soft social censorship that exists of like, well, if motherhood isn't the only thing that you ever wanted, if it's not the end all and be all, if it's not the only way that you feel the most like empowered and alive, then we really don't want to hear about it. It's like, well, how about it's extraordinary and amazing, and it's not always easy, like duh, right? So we're forced into these equally naive and kind of monstrous fantasy worlds, as opposed to maternal love for children. Like if you're veering over into maybe I shouldn't have had the kid after all, like you do need help, and there's a real problem there. But there's a whole lot of space that isn't motherhood is the only thing worth talking about, and it's all, I don't know, rainbows and unicorns.
Right. So maybe one way to think of it is, instead of thinking maybe I shouldn't have had children, maybe I should have been an octopus.
Yeah. I like that.
Just thought I'd put it out there.
Yeah, no, it's subtle. It's
not a point everyone's going to get. But,
no, but that's probably for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
I like it. Okay. So someone says there is a nutritional deficiency linked to maternal depression. In traditional cultures, there is preparation with rich food pre-pregnancy and during pregnancy. I'd be interested to know what cultures, any references that you have, but I absolutely believe this. And in fact, also in our book, we walk through a little, just in one chapter, we sort of go through like the deep history of our predecessors since the origin of life 3.5 billion years ago through now. And at some point around when we're becoming monkeys into apes, we stop being seasonal breeders and become breeders on our own schedules. And this does a lot of wonderful things for us socially, and in part, and basically empowers females to no longer be easily monopolizable by males, and sort of paves the way for monogamy and relationship between men and women that is
multiple females to be monopolized by males.
Right. And that's what
No,
polygyny into monogamy.
You said it makes it hard for females to be monopolized by males, but the question is multiple or individual. The reason that I just think it was what you said was ambiguous. I
don't think so.
Earlier I thought you said that Australia was part of the New World, so you're probably right. It was not ambiguous. But.
So I don't know where I was going now. So the move from breeding seasons to individual cycles has a couple of interesting, what look like upsides to us, one of which is the move from having females be monopolizable by males, multiple females be monopolizable by males.
Individual males.
Oh my God, dude.
I just wanted to come be clear.
So there's that social benefit. If at the moment, I'm not sure it is a social benefit.
Touche.
And then there's the the physiological benefit, right? Which is and it's actually complex. Like there is going to be generally, if you live in any kind of a seasonal place, a moment when the conditions are most likely to be ripe for you to be able to bring a pregnancy to fruition and then have sufficient milk to feed your kid to bring them to adulthood. And once you move into individual cycles, if you get pregnant at the wrong time of year, there is more risk of the the kid not being well fed enough in pregnancy, or the mother being malnourished, or your milk running dry when you're trying to feed him. And so a prediction of that would be that postpartum depression would have a seasonal component, that it would be more common for births at certain times of year.
Right. But I want to point out that the observation of a nutritional deficiency is actually exactly what you would expect, given the explanation that we first had on the table, which is your prospects change, the likelihood that the baby is going to survive goes down. Then the point is that's a place where a decision reverses. What would the indication be that your prospects have changed? A deficiency would be one very good indication that suddenly a resource stress that you may not have had at the point you got pregnant is now present. So you've got two different levels of explanation. One of them is nutritional and one of them is adaptive, but they're really the same explanation.
Yeah. And wrapped up in that is like a third thing, which you've said, but I think it's a third change that because we're who we are, we have these incredibly long gestation periods. And so the ability of the environment to change between
Keep going.
Between when you get pregnant and when you have the kid is very large.
I thought there was a hole in your sweater from our most unusual cat, but it's not.
Our most unusual.
It's an adaptation.
It's an adaptation.
Yeah.
Our most unusual cat eats cashmere. This is not cashmere. She'd have no interest in this. This is like polyester or something. You good?
I'm
okay.
Doing fine.
So we have Fairfax here, and he's sitting just out of view. I'm going to try to pull him forward so you can see him. Oh, you can. Yeah, he's washing himself, so you can just see him. See the tips of his ears. Okay. You once gave us an evolutionary take on the naming of children by parents who go by different surnames, like Weinstein and Hein. I've searched for this in your podcast without success. I wonder if I can get you to repeat what you said or point to relevant reading material. P.S. Love what you're doing. With you all the way. Best wishes from Charlie in Somerset, UK.
Well, I have no idea what we said.
But presumably we still think the same thing on this front.
So I'm not sure what the question was that we were responding to, but I think the things to say are...
Yeah, I mean, I got...
You got a riff?
Yeah.
Go for it.
I got a short answer in the can, which is that... how far back do I go? This isn't a lecture, right?
No.
Yeah.
I would say no more than 500 million years.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, evolutionary time.
Right, exactly.
Sorry, it's a little inside joke that maybe we'll share with you.
A ruthless slander against virologists, or it would be a slander if it wasn't true.
So, I'll say it. This is Fairfax. I was putting myself through the difficulty of listening to an episode of This Week in Virology, and these guys just, oh my God.
All older siblings.
So am I. No, some of them clearly aren't. They're just so wrong. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but basically one of them says, "Oh wait, but that doesn't happen. On the time, within hours. We're talking about evolutionary timescales. 500 million years. Like, you're virologists. Viruses change actually within hours, but certainly 500 million years, a lot has happened. A lot has happened in 500 million years. And the idea that that's your rubric for evolutionary change, it goes a long way to explaining why they don't actually think evolution has anything to do with what they're doing.
Totally.
Anyway, so anthropologists have sort of three ways of identifying if it's the male or the female who holds some kind of sway in a culture. There's archy, there's locality, and there's matrilocality, matriarchy, and
it's going to be wealth.
No, I can't believe I just lost the third term. Patriarchy, matriarchy, matrilocality, patriarchality, and this is lineality, which is the one that we're talking about here. Yes. Matriarchy, patriarchy, who sort of seems to hold the power, matrilocality, patrilocality, given that we tend to have rules that are about incest avoidance in most pre-industrial cultures, in which one of the sexes tends to disperse into the village or whatever of the person that they marry, and one tends to be philopatric, stay in their home place. Is it the males who disperse, making the culture matrilocal, or is it the females who disperse, making the culture patrilocal? And then lineality, matrilineality versus patrilineality, which name basically gets instantiated as indicating to whom's family you belong. And in general, you will tend to have, patrilocal and patrilineal cultures being clearly patriarchal, and they will tend to follow. Like if one of them tends to be about female lineage, you will tend to have matrilocality as well, but not entirely. So clearly, the European tradition is one of patrilineality, right? That we have historically collected our names, our family names, from our fathers, and when a man and woman marry, the family names are given from the father to the children. And there's this additional thing that makes that easier, which is that when two people get married of opposite sexes, and the woman takes the man's name, because that just makes the whole patrilineality thing easier to track. But in modern times, there seems to us and to many other people to be a sort of a happy medium where it doesn't matter to me that my name be given to our children. But I was not interested in pretending that I had gone from being, property of my father, which he never viewed me as, to property of you, which you wouldn't have viewed me as either. But, I already had a name and an existence in the world, and I wasn't interested in subsuming that and that history and adopting your name. But there seemed no reason to confuse the issue, to interfere more with patrilocality for the children. Furthermore, there is an evolutionary reason for a patrilocal naming tradition, which is that unless you've fostered or adopted or something, there's really never any confusion about who's the mother. Right. And so there's always certainty of paternity. I mean, there's always certainty of maternity, but the certainty of paternity is variable. And so by saying about the children, yes, this is, Zach and Toby are Weinsteins for sure, basically, keeps any questions at bay.
So I'm surprised at the early part of your answer, because in terms of naming, maybe I just don't know, but are there cultures in which children take the mother's? I mean, I'm wondering if mothers, brothers societies.
Yeah, there are matrilineal cultures.
I know there are matrilineal cultures. This includes the naming tradition?
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't come up with any.
Because I would have said that this was almost entirely about certainty of paternity, and that
the matrilineal cultures are far rarer. Right, like patrilineality makes this evolutionary sense precisely, in a monogamous situation, precisely because of what we've just been talking about.
Yep. Okay.
Is that all?
I think the answer has to do with certainty of paternity. The idea that there are a substantial fraction of cultures. Obviously, it's going to be much less, but a substantial fraction of cultures in which that is not the case, in which
I don't know substantial fraction. I just know that they exist.
But that argues against what I would think is the core answer, which is what you said at the end of.
Well, I don't know that it does, though. So it's not clear that anyone else will be able to figure out what we're trying to figure out. Yeah.
The nature of male and female is such that it is always the father whose parentage is uncertain. Right. Mm-hmm. That's just part of being a mammal. And so anyway, that means if that were just the simple answer, then in every culture in which there was a lineage name, you would expect it to be male, irrespective of the social dynamics of how wealth or power or migration or anything else is transmitted. Mm-hmm. And so really it's just an opportunity to test the hypothesis that this is really about paternity, certainty of paternity.
Yeah. So 3 things in the chat. Don't forget that surnames haven't been around for very long either.
Yep.
And I don't actually that would be interesting to try to figure out what the sort of the timing and phylogeny of surnames are. Mary Ellen says Iceland uses the mother's name, and that Arabs have in some cases. That's fascinating. And then an old joke, feminism. When you stick with the name of the guy your mother picked instead of taking the name of the guy you picked. That's funny.
That's a great joke.
That. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's true. I also see Fairfax is snuggling my computer. He's fallen asleep with his head on the back of my screen. All I can see is his ear. It's really kind of adorable.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we're taking too long. That was question 8. Okay. Follow up to something that we talked about last month. Men are not genetically wired to participate in sperm banks, you said, whereas they have the potential for rape and addiction to sex. I see a parallel between that and the issue of racism being software-based versus genocide being genetically encoded. In environments that don't reward it, racism can become something you instinctively see as beneficial. No, racism can't become something you instinctively see as beneficial. Whereas, when worst comes to worst, we are all wired for genocide as our genes have survived through engaging in it. The problem is we can be led to think that racism has been beneficial to our ancestors, which blurs the frontier between software and hardware, appealing to genocidal instincts to serve specific interests. Do you see a parallel too?
I think that's a very insightful comment.
Echo.
What?
It's echo.
Echo, not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is right on. And, here's the short way there, right? You can see that one group exterminating another group and suddenly having the wealth and resources that population had at their own disposal, can't help but be an advantage, right? It's evil, but you can see why evolutionarily it works. Think about racism in a business context, right? Totally different time scale, totally different physical scale. It's bad for business, right? If you can't see past somebody's race and you don't hire them because, you misunderstood how capable they were because of the color of their skin, you just fucked up. So this is what Echo is getting at, that at some level, the software is A, rewirable, and B, the ideal thing for it to do is actually see the world in front of it and assess it accurately, right?
Yeah.
Now, there can be nuance here. It may be that you lived, if you're a person who sees accurately and is not misled by people's skin, but everybody around you is, and therefore there will be impacts of your hiring a person with skin color that doesn't mean anything to you, right? There's something that could unfold there, but nonetheless, the basic thing that is ideally true is that you play your opportunities at the local time scale or the narrow time scale or in spatial scale as they actually exist. But there's this deep wiring for, there are enough of us that population could be eliminated without too much harm to us. And, we're resource stressed and we could use relief from that. Again, it's evil, but it makes a hell of a lot of sense, right? That's the problem with it. If you don't want genocide, you have to recognize why it keeps showing up so that you can stamp it out, so you can eliminate the conditions that cause that program to be triggered.
Very good. Dunbar's number for humans predicts an upper limit based on brain size and observed stable cohesive group size. What consequence, if any, does living in a technically complicated society have on practical cohesive group size? If no consequence, why? If so, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have one. I don't think I've said this out loud yet, but the problem with Dunbar's number is that it's both right and wrong, right? It's probably not a number. The point is, it's a recognition that something is finite. And I have almost no doubt.
When you say you don't think it's a number, you mean you don't think it's an integer, but it's a range? Or
it's like not property of people. For any person or any culture, there will be some number of people above which you can't do X process.
Okay.
Right. And so by thinking of it as a number, it's a little bit like, maybe it's like Gladwell's 10,000 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 10,000 isn't a meaningful number. Maybe it's true for one thing, or maybe it's not true for anything.
Equally true for carpentry and playing the oboe.
Right. But the point is, an observation that there's some number of hours, surprisingly low, at which you can gain, proficiency or virtuosity over some process. That's worth knowing. And it's just one step too cool to say, oh, it's this number.
Yeah.
So I think this
one step too cool. I like that.
It's this is true of Dunbar. So it's a very real thing to recognize, and I totally suspect the number is garbage and it changes over time and between cultures. So like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a total answer, but I think it's enough of one.
Yeah, cool. In Bret's discussion with Coleman Hughes, Bret says, quote, there have to have been differences in IQ between populations, and smarter populations have to have won out against less smart populations, end quote. It sounds reasonable generally, but have to have won out seems too strong, no? Couldn't some populations have won out for Jared Diamond type reasons?
Yep, I should have said on average. And the point about, so really my point.
I thought you would like this question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Really what I'm getting at is, man, are humans fucking smart? And wow, do they have disproportionately large brains? And what did that absolutely require in the trajectory that got us here? It required differences in how smart they were and differences in how much brain they had, right? And so the point is, I don't love the story because of people. It's easy to over extrapolate, and actually it might be true that modern populations have these differences. But basically what it says is, in order for modernity to have gotten to all of the stuff that we share that makes us different from our closest relatives, there have to have been differences that could have been favored. It's a tautology. It has to be true, right? If it has to be true, we have to admit that such differences could exist today. But what we don't have, I believe, is strong evidence that, I'm sure there are trivial differences, but that these differences are significant enough to matter. And the way to say this is, if there are differences, and there must be at least trivial ones remaining between populations, on average, I wouldn't know what populations to bet on. I don't think this has anything to do with the difference in success between populations. That has to do with other properties, very much closer to guns, germs, and steel than it is to some unfortunate difference in IQ based in lineage.
Good. Do you have any insights? Full stop. No. Sorry.
I don't know. We'll see.
No. Do you have any insights on the human microbiome and potential engineering thereof? It seems to be relevant to many health conditions and a prime example of consequences from reductionist solutions to complex systems. Could synthetic biology solutions to the human microbiome, for instance engineered probiotics, be a means to alleviate dietary or autoimmune or other microbiome issues imposed by hypermodernity, or is it another reductionist route to disaster? We were just kind of talking about this, not exactly in this context, but like your and my evolving position on supplements, which isn't even reflected in the book. I just reread the food chapter, and it's pretty unflinching in the just eat real food. Just eat real food. Do not go the reductionist route. And yet the hyper modern condition, which produces these hyper novel situations, is such that sometimes we can deal with some of the garbage situation we've created for ourselves by supplementing with a particular thing. And I think to some degree, tending to our microbiome the same way might be useful.
I think so. And the way to make the point with supplements is vitamin D, period. Right? Because the point is, you can't.
So specifically argue against that in the book.
Well, interesting.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, the point is, we live at latitudes that impede our ability to do what we would naturally do, eating good food in higher light environments. Right?
Yeah.
Therefore, supplementation is a correction for a distortion. Right? So that's the thing. Enhancing your capacity above what nature handed you is not typically possible.
Yeah.
Restoring what nature handed you with a corrective is often possible. And I totally think that this is a huge deal. I have for a long time thought that disruption of your normal gut flora is a tremendous problem. For years, we didn't talk about it. And then this, weird sort of subculture of people involved in fecal transplants and other weird stuff like that emerged, and it makes total sense. And the fact is, there is an elegant architecture that causes your gut to be colonized by the things that it is colonized by. In wolves, I believe there's a very interesting result, wolves being colonized inside of minutes with the same flora that their mothers have upon birth.
It happens through the birth process, not in utero.
Right.
It happens through the
Right.
can't
It
remember what it's
doesn't
called, the
happen in utero.
colostrum.
And if you think about it, it can't happen in utero. It has to happen after birth. And the thing is, it happens almost immediately.
Huh.
And so the point is, you are inheriting a lot of stuff. You're inheriting genes, you're inheriting culture, you're also inheriting gut flora. Cultures. Right. That's good. You're wicked on the puns. But anyway, you're inheriting these things for a reason, and they are a co-evolved set of things. And when you mess up your biome with an antibiotic that just purges this stuff, and then you get colonized by whatever things you encounter in the world, this is bad.
Yeah.
So yes is the answer. It would be great if we understood the stuff really well and could do the vitamin D trick and say, here's how we correct for the problem we've caused.
Totally. Now I'm here we go. There was a question that I had in the wrong place. Let's jump to this one. What is your view about long-term, months and years antibiotic usage? My husband has been struggling for many years. Has been struggling for many years after a tick bite, and the only times his health improves is while taking certain antibiotics. No clear diagnosis has been found, however, maybe because his condition has a combination of causes rather than just one. We don't really know what to do and worry both about staying without treatment as well as trying out too many antibiotics for too long. Any advice you may have is welcome.
Wow, this is the toughest of puzzles.
Yeah.
And
really
I don't
is.
know whether you're better off finding the antibiotic that is least terrible, and I am increasingly of the mindset that they are terrible.
Antibiotics.
Yeah, they're great on balance. Thank goodness for them, but they are much more costly physiologically than we used to think.
Yes.
I don't know if you're better off finding the one that is least destructive, or you're better off cycling them so that it's not one kind of damage that you're constantly suffering.
Right.
I don't know. I think I would probably carefully experiment a little bit and see if you can detect differences, but those differences may be on time scales that are not easy to monitor. You might need to change for months to really know what's different.
Right.
But yeah, there's a question about how concentrated. In other words, are you better off with something that you take very regularly in smaller doses? Probably better than something like Zithromax that you take a big dose and it stays in your circulation, and therefore must have some curve that drops so that you're not, you're taking way too much in order that at the lowest you've taken enough.
Yeah. No, I mean, all of these things involve trade-offs that mostly the medical professional is not adept at even recognizing that they exist, much less figuring out what to do about them. And so, when I'm thinking about like some of the stuff that some tick bites cause can be alleviated with corticosteroids. And corticosteroids are terrible for you. And in short, punctuated doses, they can really wipe out some inflammation and get you back to baseline and get your body working again. And so, I would not say never accept going on on steroids. And yet, boy, they'll take you for a ride.
Totally.
Right. But, if I had to choose, for instance, and I'm not saying that that's the situation, but if I had to choose between, in advance, and of course, this is another problem. You never know in advance what your actual choice is. But if I knew that I had an option between a 2-week course of steroids versus a 6-month course of antibiotics, I'd go with the steroids. And, knowing that both antibiotics and steroids are, have risks to them. And in part, I'm not even specifying like which antibiotics, but just the longer period of time is more ominous.
Yep.
Yeah,
totally.
even though the steroids would be a higher dose, and you're gonna get a charge off the steroids in a way that you don't off the antibiotics.
There's influences on bone density and stuff. It's all pretty scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Constant puns are the secret to a happy marriage. Yep.
My husband took a ton of really bad antibiotics for about half a year and got rid of the same problem. One had blindness as a side effect occurring in a few percentage of patients. God, it's terrible. So, here, that's what I was looking for. What do you think about bioidentical hormone replacement? I guess it depends on which, for what, right? There's a lot there's a lot of times when you're told, things are changing, and therefore you need to replace what's changing. But for some things it makes sense, and I think maybe I'll just hold off on that. I have a lot more to say on that, and I'm happy to talk about it, but maybe not right now.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. I was just rearranging things because I wanted to get that tick bite question up top. Here we go. This one doesn't follow quite as cleanly, although do ticks have lips?
No.
Okay. I've been wondering why we need lip balm while other animals with lips don't. And have humans always needed to moisturize their lips? Do you think dry? It's not my question, man. Do you think dry lips are an evolutionary cost for speech? We talk a lot, causing our mouths to be open and air to flow across our lips far more than nature might have intended. I love this question because I think she got there. I think you got to the answer in part. Okay, you don't. I don't think it's
I must say,
the complete answer, but I like this a lot.
I think it's on the way to an answer.
Okay.
I'm not totally convinced. Human speech goes back really far. We're talking at least 200,000 years, and probably much farther in, probably at least 1 million. I would say I'd actually be shocked if it didn't go back in some sense 3 million years.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time to correct for the added airflow. It's possible the airflow was much less, but
that's true.
There's something has to be novel. And I think you're on the right track with this has something to do with speech, right? But
I'm just going to close the window.
Yeah. What it may indicate, I'm going to have to think more deeply about this, but what it may indicate is the amount of speech has radically increased recently, which I think may well be true. And if you imagine living with people you knew really, really well, right? The same couple hundred people who you'd known your whole life, a lot less needs to be said. There's less. Yeah. There's less news. There's less.
It's just less to explain.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you train with your soccer team, right? And you do a lot of amazing stuff that, yes, does have to do with discussing what needs to be done, but it doesn't get discussed on the field because you already know. And so my point is a well-oiled machine, right, is one where all the parts show up at the right moment. And a town of people who knows each other, or a tribe, is that, right? So yes, discussion is important, but the amount of discussion necessary for just like doing normal stuff would be much lower.
I guess I also wonder about, once again, the role of being inside so much, the role of the fact that we are living in these climate-controlled environments, and we are acclimated to 68 degrees-ish, and in the temperate zone, and really every place I've been except in the field at field stations, specifically on BCI, where you spent so long and where I was with you for several months. The experience of going in and out of the climate-controlled space, we don't notice that much. Like, our senses do a good job of just making it all seem very normal, just the way our eyes do a really good job of making it seem like there's plenty of light out until that sort of last moment after the sun sets, when suddenly it's like, oh, wait, it's too dark to move, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have nearly the sense of how different the environment is inside than outside. And if we were always in an environment that was very similar to itself over time, our lips would probably become accustomed to, at first I'm thinking like, well, but, skiing, that's when you need your lip balm. But like, if you were always out in that environment, you would probably end up with your lips would figure out what to do. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but
no, I think this is good. So we've got two components so far. We've got something radical going on with speech that changed the amount of airflow. We've got indoor environments which are dry, both in the winter when you heat your environment because the water has been taken out. Cold air holds less water, and so when you heat that air, you've got dry, warm air. And then in the winter, in the summer, we dehumidify the air because your air conditioner, whether it likes it or not, is a dehumidifier. So there's that. And then there's the last thing I'll put on the table, which I'm least convinced of, which is there's something weird about something like clothing, where different parts of you are exposed to different environments. Yeah. Right? Clothing is novel enough. And the fact that some of you is at an equilibrium that requires a certain amount of circulation, and then the rest of you is exposed to that circulation. Now, there's some ability to vary. If some part of you is
you
cold,
can vasodilate, and
right? You have a certain amount of control over this, but do we have enough control to deal with the radical difference in exposure between different parts of the body, which doesn't go back that long?
That's
evolutionarily.
Good. Yeah. I think there's actually a ton more to go there with
good
this question.
question.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, so I see. I have them out of order. Speaking of lips, okay, not at all. That was a one-off question. I have been friends with a lot of people who identify as non-binary. Many of them have felt like outcasts or misfits for not conforming to the gender stereotypes that were prescribed onto them. I think they band together under non-binary to empower themselves to be themselves. I think that maybe if gender was less prescriptive, we wouldn't be where we are today with non-binary madness. What are your thoughts? I think if gender was less prescriptive, we wouldn't be where we are today. Would have made a lot of sense to me 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, we grew up in the 70s and 80s, and as a girl, I was gender nonconforming, and I did math, and I played sports, and I got dirty, and I never thought I was a boy, and it just seemed like gender wasn't prescriptive. Now, that was in LA, among a bunch of computer engineers and artists, actually, and, gay artists. And so, there was a lot of sort of like, yeah, whatever goes. And so, maybe that thing that I keep thinking back on, like, where did the sense of gender prescriptiveness come from? And I guess at least in the US, maybe a lot of the middle of the country still has had that. And indeed, thinking back on a few of the students we had who said they were trans and who I really felt like, why don't you just be, a guy who writes poetry? We're coming from fairly regressive families with regard to gender norms. So, would that it were this easy, I guess, that yes, we can not pretend that male and female aren't different. We can not pretend that that there are tendencies that men have more often than women, and vice versa, and also whatever it is that particularly you find fascinating, or you're great at, or you're passionate about, go for it, regardless of whether or not historically it's a male or a female typical thing to do.
Yeah, I have a very similar reaction. Who is prescribing anything?
Right. And not just like right now, but like in the last 10 years, 20,
right. And even if they were a little bit, the answer is go screw yourself. I'm free. I'll behave as I want. And
I mean, so we may actually just be out of touch in this regard. We may be naive.
I don't think so. I think that this is actually right. And the point is, there is a narrative reason to describe this as a rebellion against an oppressive regime that shows no evidence of existing. And the fact that
that's true.
Even the parts of the country or the West that still have some of these instincts, they watch the same Netflix we do. They go to the same movies. Oh, nobody goes to movies anymore, but they would if anyone went to movies. Yeah. The point is,
that's true.
Everybody's pretty much within a certain range of tolerance, except for some very weird people who aren't in a position to tell you anything. Yeah. So I think that this is it's a story that people accept too easily, and that's why it's been imposed rather than it actually explains anything.
Yeah. Good. Okay. 3 real quick questions that we can just answer because we've already answered, I think. Or one person asks if we would timestamp our videos. The awesome guy who makes our clips and does a whole lot of the other stuff behind the scenes on YouTube does timestamp them, but he doesn't. He gets to it as soon as he gets to it. And I'm actually not sure if he timestamps these. He might now, though, because he's now pulling 1 clip a month out of these. So that's happening. And then he puts them into the video description when there's room. Otherwise, he'll pin a comment. And then someone asks about as an avid myrmecology enthusiast, it's always exciting to see a new ant species described. However, when I saw the new Stromogenous species would be named Ayersday to honor the many people across the gender diversity spectrum, I was a bit taken aback. Gender diversity has nothing to do with ants. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So we talked about that in episode 81. And there's a question from someone who says they were homeschooled with creationist material, who says, where to start if a person lacks a solid basic understanding of evolution and a story of the world? What's true and how can I prove it? And they give some examples of how their creationist homeschooling experience did not provide them an ability to sort of assess things. And I actually saw in the chat, I think before we started, someone mentioned exactly this book. But whereas often I say to people when it's like, how do I start with evolution? Like Selfish Gene. In this case, I would say Ancestor's Tale, which is my other favorite Dawkins book. I used it whenever I taught vertebrate evolution, and it's rollicking. It's fun. It's not. There's parts of it that get kind of technical, but it's wonderful, and it really provides a lot of the pieces that you want, I would say.
Absolutely. Before it leaves the screen, Dark Horse moderator makes, I think, excellent points that deserve to be in that discussion too. Saying you are not living up to stereotypes makes you not a male. Saying that not living up to stereotypes makes you not male or female is capitulating to the stereotypes. I agree with this. You're empowering the stereotypes. And then the second thing is real rebellion equals go fuck yourself. I'll be a guy in eyeliner or a girl mechanic if I want. And I agree that is that there is something weirdly non-rebellious about joining the new trend towards non-binary, whatever that's supposed to mean. Yeah. Rather than just being what you are and not giving a damn what anybody thinks about it. Yeah.
No, and this, I mean, it's going back into history now too. Declaring that some of the most amazing women from history were actually men. Right. And I was like, no, they were forced to do some things to make them, appear legitimate in a society that wasn't letting women in. That doesn't mean they thought they were men or they wanted to be men. Like you're disappearing an important part of history and individual women.
Right. Yeah. And making being a man into some mythological state that everyone has the right to join rather than it's just a parameter.
Yeah, exactly. Could you maybe touch on a few of the conspiracies that you think are true beyond lab mice, starting with Operation Paperclip? That's in there. I didn't add that. Starting with Operation Paperclip and the seemingly endless corruption and slow fall of America since the end of World War II. Alex Jones keeps getting things mostly correct, and I'm just very confused as to where we are right now. Do you share a similar worldview to Eric, who talks about We the Screamers in episode 40 of The Portal? So this is the one I asked you about. I don't know. I haven't heard Eric in episode 40 of The Portal. I don't know what We the Screamers is referring to.
So I don't know which episode that is or whether I've seen that one, but he's referring to an Arthur Koestler piece. And the Arthur Koestler piece is about a guy who reports a dream. This is a guy in advance of the liberation of the Nazi death camps and therefore the complete awareness of civilization about what had been going on in and around Germany before and during the war. So Koestler, the dream, Koestler is being murdered off the side of a road where people are walking down the road, and he is screaming for help, and people cannot hear him or pretend they cannot hear him, but they pass by as if nothing is taking place. And the basic point, which those of us who have studied this period know, is that it was well known, not perfectly well known, but it was well enough known what was going on, that the degree to which people were shocked by what was going on when it was suddenly revealed.
The local
people everywhere, right? The information had gotten out. Right? People knew about the camps. And
average Americans?
I don't know about average Americans, but if they didn't, it was like lab leak, right? It was there, it was knowable, and then there was this pretense that nobody knew, and then suddenly there was the revelation, and it was like, well, that wasn't really the revelation. Some other process happened.
I didn't know this.
So it's very disturbing stuff, and it is a process that again and again and again you'll see, and that's the most dramatic example, maybe, but it's a variation on a theme. The problem of dealing responsibly with conspiracy is a very thorny problem. And the reason it is a very thorny problem is because conspiracy, by its very nature, and if you want to use a different word to escape the stigma of conspiracy, you can say collusion. Collusion, by its very nature, destroys the logic of Occam's razor if you do not have all of the information, which you never do. In other words, a collusion attempts to create the impression of a simplest explanation that is not actually the simplest explanation. And the reason you think it is that you don't have all the information. Mm-hmm. So what that means is if you're a Michael Shermer skeptic, then when a conspiracy happens, you're hobbled with respect to figuring out that it has happened because, no, there's a simpler explanation than that. Why are you adding epicycles? And the answer is because they're necessary if you really saw all of the pieces. They're not epicycles.
Right.
Okay, so that is a long way of saying what those of us who understand this face is that there are a lot of alleged conspiracies for which it is very hard to know what to think. And so, Operation Paperclip was the operation to extract Nazi scientists and basically launder them into science in the U.S. There are other conspiracies whose names we know that are absolutely certain to have happened. Crazy stuff, MK Ultra, in which hallucinogenic drugs were deployed in a mind control program. We know about COINTELPRO. We know that the FBI attempted to get Martin Luther King to kill himself, right? All of these things are known. And then there's all of the stuff that seems very likely but isn't known for sure, right? And then there's all of the stuff where something seems to have happened, but it's very hard to say what it was, and there are lots of competing hypotheses. So in any case, what I would say is this is one of the most important problems in the world. Collusion is utterly natural and normal. It is also very dangerous to what it is that we want to accomplish in civilization. So the ability to frustrate conspiracies that violate the public's interests, that cause us to do self-harm, is essential. And we're terrible at it. We're so bad, right? And our instinct to fry anybody who advances a hypothesis that seems preposterous at first is very devastating. On the other hand, most allegations of conspiracy are wrong, right? Most hypotheses are wrong. So how do we treat the landscape? It's tough. Now, what I don't want to do is burn my own credibility by going through a bunch of conspiracies where I am still very much in a state of trying to figure out what I believe. And by acknowledging that I am in that state, I acknowledge that I might actually come to believe some of these things, and therefore I am a crank as if I did believe these things.
Watch that buzzsaw.
Right, it's the buzzsaw. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to do that, and what's more, you don't want me to do that, right? You just don't. What you want me to do is be very careful, and only when something crosses a certain threshold, ivermectin, for example, right? Ivermectin's a good one. There's plenty of evidence here, and we can say, I can't tell you what the collusion is about, but I can sure as fuck see it. Right? It's there. So that one has crossed the threshold. Lab leak, somebody needs to do a history of the last year and a half. Yeah. A history of the last year and a half would tell you something about collusion. I'm not telling you it came from the Wuhan lab, though I certainly think that's highly likely, but I am telling you there was collusion to prevent us from talking about that. Yeah. What was that about? So anyway, that's the landscape, but be very careful because it's like a buzzsaw field, like a minefield, but it's buzzsaws.
God,
right?
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. People are beginning to get conspiratorial about the fact that they've never seen Eric and me on screen together. So.
You're not the same person.
I don't think it went there.
Oh, good. All right. That's
if at the point that, because it certainly happened at some point, Eric and I are publicly talking together. No, it will not be to diss Bret. That's not going to be what happens.
It's not your plan.
You know for sure that is not what would happen because of your knowledge of various dynamics. Okay, let us try to get through a number of questions very quickly so we can get to some of the COVID ones. Okay, we've got two related near-death questions, so I'm going to read both of them. We can riff on them a little bit. First is just, what is the evolutionary reason for near-death experiences? It seems quite an elaborate death dream for what I would think are genetic write-offs. And the second one is, your talk about epistemology in episode 81 was excellent. the discussion of how people have been dismissive of the lab-leak hypothesis and the apparent effectiveness of ivermectin reminds me of the approach that a number of scientists have taken towards near-death experiences, where they are written off, where they've written them off as illusions or hallucinations without seriously engaging with the most difficult to explain aspects of the phenomenon, sort of like some of these conspiracy theories, right? Bret, you've said that you have an evolutionary explanation that you're planning to share in the future. Would you be willing to have a debate or dialectic with one of the medical professionals? And there are several names here. I don't know any of them. Eben Alexander, Raymond Moody, Bruce Grayson, Lauren Belg, who have done near-death experience research and believe that there is something other than a hallucination going on so that both sides can confront the best evidence that the other has to offer.
Yeah, in principle, I think, if I'm right, and there's a business term, a particular investment may be deep out of the money, right? Like you buy an option on a stock that is very likely to lose you money, but if it wins big. If I'm right about this, if my hypothesis is right, then it's kind of a big, interesting, cool, you're never going to unsee it kind of thing. My guess is, and I'm aware of this legitimate work, I've done some reading on it, and my guess is there wouldn't be a whole lot of disagreement. The place of disagreement would be over whether or not these are hallucinations. I believe they are hallucinations, but I believe that they are hallucinations with a very particular evolutionary purpose. And that's a paradox for you, because how can there be any evolutionary purpose in somebody who's about to die and therefore has no impact on the world going forward, right? So yeah, I'd be willing to have the discussion. My guess is there would be overwhelming agreement that something is actually likely going on there and that it's meaningful, and then there would be disagreement over whether or not the correct description is hallucination, which might not be a real disagreement at all. It might be that my definition of hallucination is broad enough to encompass whatever they think it is. But yeah, I'm up for it. But my guess would be we're at two different levels of analysis. Their primary level of analysis is this thing is real and it works like this. And my primary level of analysis is, why is that there? Right?
Good. Bret on Dark Horse with Jordan Peterson said something to the effect of religious patterns are adaptive. Human individuals are built to protect the long-term populational well-being. Then the question is, how is the personal, to both of us, how is the personal, spiritual, or religious experience important to you? Are teachings from Judaism, Buddhism, Christianity, or Baha'i tradition specifically cherished? So there's infinite ways to approach that. If we want to go very quickly and talk just about, so the person asks about both sort of teachings and traditions. And I will say that we have created our own modification of the Hanukkah tradition, which actually makes up the epilogue of our book. And without having the same kind of deep meaning, because I was raised sort of secular Christian, without any of the religiosity, but with a Christmas tree and feasting and all of this, and we do that in our home as well, and it doesn't, and we talk about Jesus around that time. You and I do, in a way that never happened in my home growing up.
Yeah, as a social philosopher.
As a
not as a mythical being.
Right, exactly. And then I guess the other thing that I think I retain, not from childhood, but from just really just like a 2.5 week experience when I was 17, when I was a senior in high school at an artist Buddhist retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh. I was the teenager among a bunch of, I think I've mentioned this here before, the teenager who had been invited to hang out with a bunch of beat poets and artists, and the then relatively new to the country Thich Nhat Hanh, who led us in 3 sitting meditations and 1 walking meditation every day for 2 weeks. And then it was in Ojai in Southern California, and then we had the rest of the time to create, we all did the work of the place, to do the food preparation, the cleanup and everything. But I think it fit my personality already, but also that set of experiences primed me to become really good, for instance, at animal behavior, at observation, at being interested in and willing to sort of fade and watch as opposed to need to imprint on the situation at all times. And I do think that is in part what I learned from Buddhism, from Thich Nhat Hanh in that time.
All right. For my part, I will say I'm going to have to figure out whether this is actually what I believe. But in this moment, I am wondering if I am not, in some ways, in this regard, the exact inverse of Sam Harris. Right? Mm-hmm. Sam Harris has this belief that you can go all the way to bedrock with respect to scientific fact. Mm-hmm. And from that, you can build up everything, including ethics. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, he believes that electrons may be conscious. My feeling is, I believe we can go the other direction. Ultimately, we could sort out why we believe the things we do that aren't actually based in evidence. We can do all that. We can do the adaptive analysis of our confusions and the like. But I am also very comfortable participating in the part of this that isn't connected to that, and just imagining, there's a connection, but the value of this is at a different level, right? So is that the inverse of Sam or not? I don't know. But anyway, my point is, I weirdly feel like somebody who thinks spirituality is hugely important and is 0% spiritual myself. I think there's just none. And the point is, I don't think it diminishes what I derive from that space. I don't need to be an active spiritual participant in spirituality to value it and to integrate it, and something in that neighborhood.
Yeah, that's good. To be continued, I think, that conversation.
Yep.
Okay, four related questions, and then a fifth before we get into COVID space. God, I have 20 minutes left. I'm going to read all four of these because I think they all sort of relate. You and Bret are rewarded to some degree for pursuing truth. I mean, it's why so many of us tune in so often. That said, social belonging is much more powerful than truth mining for so many of us. Sometimes it feels like we are in different classes. It's like a billionaire telling me to invest my money. Probably sound advice, but shit, I'm broke. Do you have advice for changing this economic and social landscape so it is cost effective to pursue truth rather than belonging? That's one. I greatly appreciate the sanity your discussions have provided. That's not just a shout out, but actually relevant to the question. Before being open about my skepticism, I was rich in community. Discovering your videos has kept me going during some quite dark periods, and I'm incredibly grateful. However, they have increasingly become my primary community, as friends, I live in Portland as well, have disappeared. While I'm grateful, YouTube videos are not friends, and Discord and conference meetings don't completely fill that gap. My main question is local. Do you participate in a local Portland group that you can recommend for like-minded individuals? If not, I would love to start one. To make this more global, how can like-minded folks develop local groups to support our fledgling, and I'd say probably often a bit battered, community? And the next two are slightly different, but how does one try to resurrect someone deeply woven in the weft of wokeism? Nicely phrased. Say there's someone whom I deeply care about and don't want to excise from my life. Where would you recommend I start? Assume they're fully ensconced in the ideology. And next one, I would really like advice on how to communicate heterodox opinions and ideas to someone who is tuned out of questioning narratives that are given to them from establishment sources. And that goes on a little bit, but all of this.
I think I got it. Can I just
do it?
All right.
Go.
One, for these folks who are deeply ensconced in wokeism or not skeptical, I think if it were me, I would adopt a generous and ironic. I would become a commentator on the difference between what you see and what they see, right? Mm-hmm. And I would just do it very non-judgmentally, right? And I would say, you and I are going to disagree over this, and here's why I think we're going to disagree over this. And if they can hear that you can see both sides of the thing, right, they're much more likely to be able to step into your shoes and say, well, if I was to look at it through your eyes, then maybe I would imagine that X, Y, and Z. And anyway, it's the basis for something. Mm-hmm. The earlier question about community, we don't really have something in Portland. I wish we did, and if you start it, please let us know. I wish we had that community. But the one I really want to answer is the first one. Okay, the first question in that series was about the
Rewarded for pursuing truth.
Right.
How do you? Yeah.
We are rewarded for pursuing truth. Many of the people in our audience feel like they are of a different sort, and yet they are finding some value in hanging out, listening to the discussion, asking questions, that sort of thing. I think this is the most normal thing in the world, and there are two explanations for it.
Mm-hmm.
One of them has to do with, one of the major keys to success for humans is division of labor of every kind, right? You want people in your group who are brilliant musicians. You want people who know how to, deal with an emergency. You want people who know how to solve unsolved problems. You want, people who inspire you, whatever it is. And so on the one hand, I wouldn't question too much, okay, we seem different to you from you. So what? And then B would be part of this is an issue of timescale. I think we humans analyze many, many things on the wrong timescale. We might have the right tools, but we're just looking at them wrong. And so my feeling is if I look at healing, for example, healing is something that you really, there's an immediate process. It's very dramatic if you cut yourself or break a bone or something like that. And then there's a 5-year process and a 10-year process. And if you're not aware of those things, you sort of lose track of what's actually going on. So I think the thing that we used to say to students is that this is not a linear subject. It is a subject that is better treated like a language, and immersion is the tool. And therefore, the first time you hear an evolutionary conversation of the kind that we have, I'm sure it sounds like you barely get pieces of it here and there, and I got that part, right? But it doesn't sound, you couldn't repeat it, you couldn't make the argument, right? It's very far away. And then the more times you hear these kinds of answers, you sort of get used to the process of addressing these questions and what are the tools. The same tools keep coming up when different questions are on the table. Mm-hmm. And the point is you're learning a kind of thinking language. And if you find value in it, then I wouldn't worry too much about where you are in it. Just participate to the extent it feels cool and rewarding. And you know what? If you pay attention to a long time scale, 5 years from now, you'll find that you're making arguments that nobody's made before, right? That's the natural progress. We saw that with students time and again. So like that.
Cool. One last non-COVID-y question. And I actually just have something to read and answer, and I think we get it. But this begins with a comment. You have marveled, I always forget to put these on. You have marveled that Dr. Fauci retains so much credibility in the public eye. The reason probably is that he can achieve a Fauci knows best, like father knows best equation. He looks the part of the white-haired, kindly patriarch. He reassuringly embodies patriarchy. I think that's right. The question is, critical theory enables the analysis of cultural signs. Shouldn't it continue to play a part in contemporary thought? Semiotics, deconstruction, postmodernism generally. They are hazardous, but are they useless? And we've got lots to say here, but I just found, I'm just going to read this tiny little section from our book. Mm-hmm. Postmodernists have been at the leading edge of promoting the view that reality is socially constructed. Postmodernism and its ideological child, post-structuralism, were once contained in a small corner of the academy. These ideologies do contain kernels of truth. They teach us that our sensory apparatus biases us, and that we are mostly unaware of those biases. They reveal that schools, factories, and prisons are similar in their use of power to control populations. That was analyzed by Foucault in his metaphorical extension of Bentham's Panopticon. And critical race theory has at its foundation the real observation that the American legal system has had a particularly difficult time emerging from its racist past, and that full recovery from that past is not yet on the horizon. These are a few real and valuable contributions that such ideologies have contributed to the world, but most modern instantiations of postmodernism have jumped the shark. And so I think that pretty much summarizes.
Yep, perfectly.
Yeah. Okay, and now we've got just a series of COVID questions. We'll get through as many of them as we can in the next 15 minutes. You have mentioned the exposure to vitamin D through the sun as a reason to be unmasked outdoors. Should I have rethought my winter beard?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe. I mean, there's another reason that beards are a hazard in this, which is if masks work. And I say if. I'm now convinced there is some very complex thing to say about this, and I don't know what it is.
Hmm.
But if masks work, beards probably reduce their effectiveness because they open gaps where it would be better if they didn't have them. So
Yeah, not so much for you, but
or the Van Dyke, which people think is a goatee.
yeah, it's not a goatee.
It's not a goatee.
No. But people with full face beards, their masks just don't fit as well.
Yep.
I am in a jurisdiction that is getting cold feet about the AstraZeneca shot. Am I right to be skeptical about health experts planting the seed that mixing vaccines is probably safe? Yeah, what are they doing?
Well, first of all, maybe I don't understand exactly what's going on, but I wondered from the beginning, are you better off or worse off if you get a combination of shots versus two of the same kind?
Which is a legitimate question. But at the point that, oh, wait, maybe we shouldn't be using this one, oh, it'll be fine. Like there's no discussion up front about whether or not actually mixing shots might be a valuable immunological experience for your body.
Right.
And only at the point that, oh, we actually think that this one is no longer safe for you. Don't worry about it. Just take the other one. Like, okay, your policy is entirely based on like availability as opposed to science.
Well, let's put it this way. What they are really saying without ever saying it is, we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. You're the guinea pig. That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
And we don't know. You're the guinea pig is mighty frightening when you're dealing with something that you can't undo, right? That's really it. And, we haven't said this, but we should say it. One of the things about ivermectin, you can undo it. You can stop taking the stuff.
Yes.
Once vaccinated, you're vaccinated. So
yeah, which is a pro and a con, right?
Right.
Like if COVID retained its pandemic level presence, if we didn't reach herd immunity and shut it down effectively, then no one should want to be on a prophylaxis forever.
Right.
Right. And I said this to someone in Patreon earlier today. I was responding to some stuff. Like, I've been waiting for a malaria vaccine for decades. I have been on probably close to 2, maybe more than 2 years worth of malaria prophylaxis.
Yep.
And the malaria prophylaxis, unlike ivermectin, is nasty, especially mefloquine/lariam, which luckily we've got better options now, but that stuff's terrible. And I've wanted a vaccine for malaria for so long.
Yep.
This is not that situation, though.
No, it's not that situation. And I'm stuck. I'm stuck in the observation that until you get to, we don't know and you're the guinea pig, right? We don't know and you're the guinea pig does not necessarily mean don't get the vaccine. But it's the beginning of the only honest conversation we can have.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
It has to be there. And the fact that it's never there is, that's driving some of us crazy.
Yeah. Someone asks, howdy. Could you please talk about adverse reactions of people taking the vaccine who have already had significant, with long haulers, COVID infection, and at what point that potential goes down?
Wait, I miss it.
So I'm not...
Try the beginning of the question again.
Could you please talk about adverse reactions of people taking the vaccine?
Yeah.
Who have already had a significant, with long haulers, COVID infection, and at what point that potential goes down? So I don't totally track it because we have talked before, and I don't remember which episode, about some evidence that some people report that being long haulers, they take the vaccine and they get better.
Yep. And then some adverse effects are actually increased by having had COVID previously.
Some adverse effects of the vaccine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, at what point does the potential goes down? No one knows.
Right.
If anyone knows and they're telling us, that's terrible. But as far as I know, we don't know.
I'm going to report several facts and I'm going to let you put them together. Okay. Here are the facts.
Yeah.
There is some evidence, though not conclusive, that long haul COVID at least includes cases in which the virus has retreated but is not gone, right? And that spike protein is continuing to be produced, and that spike protein is the key to many things here. It is the key to vaccine reactions. It is the key to damage from COVID. It is the key to long haul COVID, right? Second fact.
I know where you're going.
Ivermectin bonds spike protein and interferes with its interaction with other things. That's
interferes with the spike protein's interaction with other things.
Because it physically binds to the spike protein. It's like magnets. Imagine that refrigerators were out attacking you. And you released a bunch of magnets that stuck to them and made it impossible for the refrigerator to touch the things that it was burning.
Definitely had days that felt like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, ivermectin binds the spike protein.
Useful.
And you might from that hypothesize a number of effects. If the first set of facts or apparent facts is correct, you might hypothesize a series of observations that you could look for with respect to treatment with the devil drug ivermectin.
This whole thing makes me so angry.
I know.
And so many of the people who are acting like follow the science and our authority tells you that you need to do this are people who would also have been like data-driven science, people who wouldn't recognize a hypothesis if it hit them in the head. And data-driven is stupid and wrong, but hey guys, where are the data? Like, why? There are just a number of things that I've seen recently. Like, oh, actually, the CDC is not going to keep track of the data on, minor reactions to the vaccines anymore. Oh, well, VAERS isn't any good. You can't trust it. But we don't have an alternative system wherein we could be taking data. And even if they said we can't share it with you, we can't do the populist science thing anymore, but we have it, I don't have the sense that we even have the damn data. Like, they are protecting themselves by not even collecting the data.
They are avoiding the collection of data. Now, I want to point several things out because I think you just cracked the case again, right? A, who's data-driven now? Okay? That's one thing. Who's data-driven now, right?
Yes.
Second thing is, this is exactly the proof that data-driven was the cryptic attack on reason that we always claimed it was.
Yes.
You and me always claimed it was. Oh, yes, and Fairfax agrees. But the point is, if you were hypothesis-driven, you'd come up with the data and you'd know what we know.
That's right.
If you're data-driven and you can prevent data from being collected, then you don't have any obligation.
You get to work in a vacuum.
Yes.
You get to work in a landscape in which you create all reality because it turns out you didn't believe in objective reality after all.
Right, exactly. Oh, there's something so beautiful here because it takes money to collect data. And if the peer review system and the regulators can prevent the data from being accumulated and then claim that you can't do anything because there's not enough data, they win.
Damn. Yeah.
Fuck these people.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, Fairfax did wake up. Yeah. All right. What time is it? It's 12:55. Is Johnson & Johnson a traditional vaccine? If not, why? It is not.
It is not. So first of all, there's a bunch of different kinds of...
I feel like there was maybe it was episode 61. There was an episode where we talked about the mRNA and the DNA vaccines.
So there are a number of different kinds of vaccines, right? There are vaccines that contain just antigen. There are vaccines that contain broken up viruses, which is effectively functioning like antigen. There are vaccines that contain active viruses that have been pruned of their harmful components, right? There's a whole spectrum of these things. What the J&J vaccine is an adenovirus that has been borrowed as a transport vehicle. The virus isn't in there, but what is in there is the message, the DNA that will cause RNA to cause spike protein.
The adenovirus is in there. When you said the virus isn't in there, you mean that the coronavirus isn't in there.
The coronavirus isn't in there.
Right.
The adenovirus is being used as a vehicle to transport a message from coronavirus, right? So this is a novel composite of elements. And the reason that we have said that this is one step less dangerous, because it is one step more evolutionarily familiar, is that adenoviruses are common in people, right? We've all had them. We've had colds. And so an adenovirus showing up in your system is not some new thing to be terrified of. It's probably no worse and maybe a lot better than getting a cold, which is not bad or not terrible, So anyway, it's one step that you don't have to worry about in this process. Whereas what the hell does lipid nanoparticles actually mean? Where do they go? How many of them are you dealing with? What happens when they bind to your cells and become part of your cell membrane, right? Who knows what that means? So it's one step less novel, but it's novel.
Yep. This is a question that we actually just answered, and I saw someone said I have a terrific memory for remembering these things. I don't, but I have a terrific spreadsheet. for remembering these things. So
you have an externalized memory.
Yeah, and I did come up with 61. I may be wrong about that,
a-
but I think 61 has come up a lot because it's where we were first talking about vaccines, and so it got a lot of hits and a lot of.
This is a classic demonstration. My father, many years ago, my father is so enthusiastic about technological progress, and he predicted that we would soon have microchips in the brain that would allow us to do things that we had never learned, like
This
calculus.
is like when you were a kid?
Yeah, and I mocked him mercilessly, and it turns out that nothing like this has happened. Things that are more like it than I would have acknowledged have happened, but it's a running battle between us, and every time anything happens that's anything remotely arguably like this, he sends me a report, and many of them come down to, actually, Dad, that's microchips near the brain. This is one of those cases. Your spreadsheet
I got a microchip near my brain.
You got a microchip near your brain.
And this one I like. Well, I don't actually like this particular one because it's failing, but it's a useful tool. So this one just asks about, have you seen the videos of the magnetic anomaly being presented at the site on people's arms? So we talked about that in the Q&A in episode 81.
So let me just say, I don't...
Actually, wasn't that yesterday? I mean, you've even written that down wrong.
I think we
wrote
talked
that
about
down
it twice.
Okay, well, yeah, so I think that was yesterday.
Let's put it this way. If this is a real phenomenon, and I don't rule it out, it should be trivially easy to demonstrate.
Right.
Right?
So again,
but my point is, the demonstration of it will not be a video of a magnet sticking to a person's arm, because there are other forces that can stick a magnet to a person's arm. The video the data that proves it will be data collected where you measure the attractive force, maybe even the attractive force before the thing has actually touched the skin, right? So anyway, I'm waiting to see that. And if you think it's out there, show it to me, because if the thing is magnetic,
show me the data.
Yeah. Okay. Who's data driven now?
Let's get through two more before we go and enjoy our beautiful, beautiful day today. It has been so sad watching India struggle with the latest COVID surge. Has there been any news in the medical community about the use of ivermectin in treating COVID cases anywhere in India?
Yes, there is. There's very encouraging, I would say, unignorable data, except these people have proven an ability to ignore.
Yeah. So what is it, Goa, I think? So state by state differences in terms of is it governors? I don't know who runs states in India, but whoever the head of individual states in India have been able to make different decisions, and you can see case rates dropping within days of widespread ivermectin rollout.
It's an impressive pattern. You've got a steep climb, you've got a wave, you've got ivermectin being deployed, and you get an immediate decline in deaths. And there's a lot more nuance there. But so I think Goa and Uttar Pradesh show this pattern. It's been seen in Mexico. It's been seen in Peru. Something slightly different, but equally encouraging, was seen in Argentina. There's a lot of this evidence, and
Yep. Okay, final question. The lab leak hypothesis was included in the Google-funded RAND report as a conspiracy theory, which they recommended infiltrating groups and spreading scientific information to counter. How do we defend our ideas from being lumped in with the idea that the Earth is flat?
It's very hard to describe, but at some level, the truth and the pattern that finds it sounds different, and it works differently. And recognizing what the truth sounds like is an art. It's not a science. But the key to doing it is figure, who can you trust? Who predicts things? All right. Maybe those people who predict things successfully are thieves. Maybe they're stealing from somebody and they're not really capable. But then that makes certain predictions about what they will and will not be good at predicting. Right. So there's a way of figuring out who to trust and who not to trust. And I would point you to, you haven't had a chance to see it yet, but there is a very brief little excerpt from a documentary, a white Zimbabwean ecologist whose name is
Can you look it up?
Yeah.
I can look it up.
Okay.
I don't know what we're talking about.
Anyway, it was a little video that started circulating yesterday, was my first awareness of it, of this ecologist talking about the fact that people get dumber when they go to grad school rather than get smarter. And his point
Oh,
is,
you tweeted this.
yeah,
Okay.
his point is, by the time they get out of graduate school, they simply don't believe anything that isn't in a peer-reviewed paper. And this is so right on. So you've just got to listen to what he's saying about this process that makes you dumber, and then infer.
So this is, but it just doesn't have his name on it. Right?
Yeah, it does. There it is.
Oh, Alan Savory.
Alan Savory.
Yeah.
Who I'd never heard of before. I'm halfway through his TED Talk, which is very fascinating. It may be wrong, but it's fascinating. Anyway, have a look at the video and listen to what the man says, and then realize that all sorts of dark horses, right? People that you've come to trust because you've heard what they have to say and it makes sense and, doesn't blow up over time or whatever. All sorts of people who are in that category react to this video in a very particular way. It's like, yep, that's a description. That is how it works. And once you know that that's how it works, you will be able to ignore an awful lot of very authoritative wrong bullshit.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good. Well, guys, we've had a good time here with you today. And as has Fairfax, he's going to wake up and give you one last stretch, maybe show off his butt. Yep. And you're going to be in charge of taking us off air, but
yes,
we
I
will.
am.
But we will end with saying the usual things that we say, which is to be good to the ones that you love and eat good food and get outside. And you have been adding
achieve greatness,
bows and sparklers and glitter to
well,
this.
achieving greatness. Most days don't offer the opportunity, but if your day offers the opportunity, achieve some greatness.
Yeah.
All right. We added something else yesterday, but I don't frankly remember what it was. So anyway, this has been great fun.
Yep.
Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time.
Actually, so you're gonna have a dark horse out this week that's gonna be big.
It's gonna be big.
Yep. And next week, on our live stream, we are going to formally announce our book and start doing. We'll say this next week, but every week from then on, we'll do a segment or maybe even the whole show devoted to one of the chapters of the book, since they're all quite different.
We will achieve literary greatness beginning next week. All right. I am now going to struggle through the key binds, whatever that means, to take us off the air.
Key binds?
Key binds. Key binds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Key binds.
Let's see. We got and then bye, guys.